outside of so-and-so says, have you ever tried to clear up some things about faith about other bands like Trouble, for example? You know, because they've got lyrics that sound Christian because they've got scripture in their lyrics, but they're not a Christian band. None of them are Christians. And on the opposite side, it's like there's bands like Lance King and his albums and bands like Balance of Power. It's like he's a Christian. He's, you know, there might be other people in the band that are Christians, yet the lyrics are not Christian. It's just, you know, just a rock band. Have you ever tried to clear up some rumors about things like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have. One particular instance I can think of is there was rumors about this one particular singer who was having an adulterous affair or affairs, sleeping with girls on the road, and he's a married guy. And you know, there was a little bit of pressure on me, maybe just internally or maybe externally, on exposing this guy, or, you know, letting that carry on in the name of Christian rock. It's not going to make any of us look good. You know, if he's really doing this, it's not just hurting him, but it's hurting all of us in a way. So I came up with a question. I said, you know, what is your career right now costing you personally? I kind of phrased the question kind of like that, that would give him a chance to say, well, you know what, my career keeping me on the road has kept me away from my family, my wife, and I've blown it with relationships. I kind of gave him enough rope to hang himself there. In this particular instance, he didn't. He didn't take the bait, and I wasn't super trying to manipulate him, but I kind of gave him a few questions like that gave him the ability to come clean and confess without being an accuser and saying, is it true you're having affairs on the road, and what happened in Missouri, you know, whatever. I wasn't that way, but I kind of felt like that was my tactful approach to the situation. That's how I approached this particular guy, to give him a chance to say, if he was listening to me, to open up and talk about something, because you know, sometimes the decisions you make in the career path you're on, they can cost you personally. And, you know, if somebody's gone through a divorce, or they've become estranged from a member of their family because of a decision they made, that's a personal cost. That's something that costs them dearly, and something they probably regret. So one thing that's it's neat to have a magazine or a medium to communicate to people, is because sometimes you can educate, you can help, and you can edify other people. Like a lot of people say, you know, suffering produces great art, and one reason that is because all of us suffer and all of us have problems. And when somebody shares openly about what they're struggling with, it kind of encourages us. If it's the same exact issue, it encourages us a lot, because it gives us maybe advice on how to get through it. But even if it's just some other issue, it can encourage us, because we have our own problem, and seeing that this person is still pushing on, or still carrying on, or dealing with it this way, or maybe even making mistakes that we realize, I don't want to be done like that. We can all benefit from somebody sharing about their life. So it's kind of neat having a platform like this, because sometimes you can do that. And I've tried to kind of have a balance and be able to be a magazine people that are into Christian rock can look to with some sort of responsibility, like to tell the truth. If somebody's just a fake Christian and it's just all a joke to them, it would be cool if HM Magazine had the guts enough to expose that, or to ask them about it and give them a chance to either lie or tell the truth and come clean, or whatever they choose to do. So sometimes that's me doing my duty, as in the context I'm in. When you have a position like this, whether it's expectations somebody puts upon you or something you have internally, sometimes you can do some good by doing that. So that from time to time I have addressed situations like that, where you hear rumors or you hear stories, or maybe you know something, but the public doesn't know it. And so sometimes giving the person a chance to come clean or shed some light on the subject. I remember when Trouble came out in 1984, I think they toured I think it was 84, they came through Austin. They started off their show with the lights down. They were playing music from the Jesus Christ Superstar, the crucifixion scene. And I remember it reminded me of being the high school punk I was earlier, but before I was saved. And during this one dramatic pause, I just bellowed from the back of the audience, Jesus Christ rose from the dead, kind of in this Gary Munster kind of voice, kind of like, not Munster voice, but like I was in a horror movie. I remember people looking in the back of me like, and I had a conversation with some of the members of Trouble in the bathroom. We were standing there, in the men's room, and you're doing your business, and talking to somebody next to you is kind of awkward and dorky, but that's how I got to meet that band. And apparently the drummer and the bass player were the real serious Christians in that band, and they were using religious imagery as part of their motif, and they were kind of lumped in. And I think the phrase white metal was first coined to describe trouble, and they're a pretty interesting band. Any other questions?
Tell us about a couple of your personal favorite bands, why they are your favorites.
Personal favorite bands. Well, I've got a lot of personal favorite bands. It kind of changes over time. There hasn't been one that's been like for all time. There's a band called Archangel that really have only released one album. It came out in 1981 on Star Song, and they were kind of a progressive rock hybrid of Emerson, Lake and Palmer meets Jethro Tull meets Rush meets Kansas. And they had an acoustic side and a rock side. One was called Wind Face and one was called Fire Face, the two sides of the vinyl album. And I really like them. And the singer for that band, a guy named Kemper Craft, writes a column for me in HM called Christianity and Art. And I feel so blessed and privileged and honored to have his writing in my magazine. And he's just done it for years. A lot of people made fun of him because he had one series called The Sons of Issachar, Part 27. He just carried on this column, for like 6 years before it's probably longer than that, before that Sons of Issachar series was ever finished. Now he's doing one called Jesus is My Girlfriend. And he's writing about the trend in modern day worship and kind of like, evaluating worship styles and songs and words and lyrics. I like him a lot. There's a guy named Daryl Mansfield that I like a lot. He's an older Christian rocker that is most prominent on the West Coast because when the Jesus movement happened, there was one particular church called Calvary Chapel that was an early part, kind of a solid foundation of the Jesus movement, especially on the West Coast, and they grew and multiplied. And now it's like a franchise. There's like over 1,000 Calvary Chapels all over the world. Because they're non-denominational, you don't really call them a denomination. But it's just like one because 1,000 different churches that all have one central leadership is like a denomination, but they don't call themselves that. But so Daryl has been a Calvary Chapel guy, and because there's so many of those churches on the West Coast, most of his career has been playing in churches on the West Coast, so he's really big there, but he's played all over the world too. And it's one of my favorite interviews. I asked him, so how did you learn to play the harmonica the way you do? Because other bands like Loverboy hired him to play harmonica on their record. He's become renowned for his harmonica playing. And he says, well, I approach it like a guitar player, because I used to be a guitar player before the incident. And what happened was I was in high school, and I was a clean kid. They called me, don't panic, it's organic, Daryl Mansfield. And I was a joker. One time I stole the cop uniform and I wore it to school. I got there early and I directed traffic into the parking lot. And then one particular week, just everything went bad. I had a girlfriend dump me, and an uncle died in Vietnam. And I wanted to be with Jesus. And the only way I knew how to be with Jesus was to die. So I took this 12-inch butcher knife and I went to this small church, and I cut my right wrist so hard with the knife that I had to hold the butcher knife between my knees to cut the left wrist. I'm hearing this and going, oh my gosh. And he lays down on the altar to meet Jesus. And fortunately, some janitor is walking by and sees him there and calls the ambulance. And in the ambulance, a cop is asking him questions, and the cop's got an answer for every program. He's been programmed how to deal with hippies and drugs. And he goes, what do you want, son? And Daryl says, life. And he didn't have an answer for that. And fortunately, some nurse at the hospital showed him how he could be with Jesus without dying. And he accepted Christ, and he's become an evangelist. This is great. But he lost so much dexterity in his wrist from cutting them in his suicide attempt that he can't play the guitar anymore. So he approaches the harmonica like a lead guitar, and that's why he has so much style and such a unique sound to his harmonica playing. So that's one of my favorite artists. And that story, I'll never forget. That was one of my favorite interviews because it just went so deep and told such a dramatic story. King's X is one of my favorite bands. King's X and Galactic Cowboys are kind of similar. They're kind of like blood brothers. They kind of come from the same producer in the same part of the country in Houston, Texas. And they kind of mix the harmonies of the Beatles and even Southern gospel. Some of the guys in Galactic Cowboys have a Southern gospel upbringing, and they mix that with the heavy rock of Metallica or Grand Funk Railroad. And it's a very unique sound. And at the time, there was a prophecy going around certain churches called Sons of Thunder, and some pastor or leader in the Vineyard Church in Denver had this vision that God was showing him these sons of thunder. They were taking a new music. They were taking it out to the world, and they were kind of spreading this evangelism, this revival through music, and they would be called Sons of Thunder. It was written on their back, and they looked like bikers, but they played music of the world, and they had a tremendous impact. And so this was spreading around churches, and we were kind of looking at the time, okay, is this new music happening now? Is this a real prophecy? Can we see it? And I used to look at bands like King's X and the Violet Burning and think, these are my two picks for new music. They were very innovative. Like King's X in particular, they had a background, and they were Phil Keaggy's backup band. Some of the members were in Servant, and they were in Morgan Cryer, who had a big hit called Pray in the USA. They were in his band. So they came from kind of a Christian rock band, and they decided to just be kind of like Christians in the band. That's kind of when that phrase became popular, because there's a lot of Christians who weren't doing the classic Christian ministry model. And just to explain that real quick, that I think when Christian rock and the Jesus movement happened, you had these ex-hippies or hippies for Jesus playing their rock music, and their concert would culminate and climax in an altar call. And so people associated Christian rock with altar calls and evangelism, and that was kind of the package, that was the model. And so kids that went to those concerts were like, wow, I want to do that. Well, after time changed and you had bands like MXPX and King's X come along, there was a different model. They were Christians in a band. Their music reflected a Christian worldview. Their faith had an impact on what the lyrics and the messages they had, but they didn't culminate their shows in an altar call. It wasn't like a ministry band. It was like Christians in a band. And now you have kids going to their shows, oh man, I want to be like that. So now there was two choices. And so there was like a kind of an ever-dividing chasm between ministry bands and Christians in a band. And that's been like almost 20 years later now, we've seen a result of that. And I think it's healthy, and I think it's kind of neat that bands like Switchfoot and As I Lay Dying and August Burns Red and the Devil Wears Prada are just huge in the mainstream, and they're just getting massive exposure. They're on all the big tours, they're touring with all the big bands, they're respected for their musical talent alone, and lo and behold, they're believers. And I think that the seeds that kids get from that is like, there's somebody I want to be like. He actually believes in God. I'm going to check that out now. I think there's something valid in that. And there's definitely some criticism out there that some folks think that if you're going to use music, because we never liked this rock stuff anyway, if you're going to use this despicable stuff I hate, it better be to lead kids to Jesus, or else I won't support it. These artists aren't necessarily following that model. They're doing something that I think is valid and good and should be praised and encouraged, but some people won't see it that way. They'll just won't accept it.